I did not raise my voice. I did not make a single threat. And I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened. I am not a man who acts out of anger. Everything I did with a clear head, a steady hand, and 63 years of patience finally running out. My name is not important. What is important is that I am a retired civil engineer from Oakville, Ontario. I spent 37 years designing bridges, structures, built to hold weight, to endure pressure, to stand long after the people who built them are gone. I know exactly how much stress a foundation can take before it cracks. I know the precise moment when something that looks solid from the outside has already failed from within. I should have applied that same knowledge to my own family years ago. My son is 34 years old. I will call him my son because that is what he is, even now. His wife, I will call her my daughter-in-law, is 32. They have been married for 4 years. They live in a 2-bedroom condominium in Mississauga, in a building I know well because I am the one who bought it. Let me be precise about that, because precision matters. In 2021, when my son and his then-fiancée were looking for a place to live, the market in the Greater Toronto area was moving the way it always moves: fast, merciless, completely indifferent to young couples without savings. My son called me. He said they had found a unit they loved. He said he didn't want to ask, but he didn't know what else to do. He said, "Dad, I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate." I said, "How much?" The purchase price was $619,000. They had saved $47,000 between them. I covered the rest of the down payment, $75,000, so their mortgage would be manageable. I also covered the closing costs, the land transfer tax, and the first year of condo fees while they got settled. In total, I put in just over $94,000 of my own money. Money I had saved over decades. Money from a career spent away from home more mornings than I care to count. I did not ask for anything in return. I did not put my name on the title. I did not ask them to sign a document. My son is my son. You do not hand your child a contract when they are drowning. That was my first mistake. My wife passed away 11 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 4 months from diagnosis to the end, and I spent the first 2 years afterward not entirely sure what I was still doing here. My son was 23 then. He moved back home for a year. And that year, I will say this honestly, that year saved both of us. We cooked together. We watched hockey together. We drove out to Algonquin once in October and sat by the lake and said almost nothing, and it was the best conversation I have ever had. I tell you this because I need you to understand who my son was to me, and who I believed he still was, right up until the moment I found out otherwise. My daughter-in-law and I were never warm. I accepted that early. She is a precise, image-conscious woman who cares deeply about how things appear, and I am a man who spent his career in work boots on construction sites and still buys his dress shirts at Mark's workwear shop. We operated at a polite distance. Family dinners at Christmas and Thanksgiving, a birthday call here and there, my son in the middle managing both of us, which I now realize was an unfair position to put him in, though the unfairness was not coming from my side. Last September, my son called to tell me they were planning a wedding vow renewal for their 5th anniversary. They had a small ceremony during COVID restrictions and always felt cheated out of the celebration they wanted. They were planning something proper this time, a venue in Niagara-on-the-Lake, dinner for 60 guests, a weekend event at a vineyard inn. Beautiful idea. The kind of thing my wife would have loved. My son said, "Dad, we'd love for you to be involved." I said, "Of course, whatever you need." What they needed, it turned out, was money. The venue deposit alone was $12,000. The catering package for 60 guests at the inn was another $18,500. Flowers, photographer, accommodations for out-of-town family. By the time my son walked me through the full budget, we were looking at a celebration that would cost close to $48,000. I said, "Let me think about what I can contribute." I slept on it for 3 nights. My pension from the province is comfortable. I have savings, I have no mortgage, my needs are modest. And this was my son's celebration, a chance to have the wedding day that COVID had taken from them. I called him back and I said, "I'll cover the venue and the catering. Consider it my gift." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, I don't know what to say." I said, "Don't say anything. Just make sure there's a good table for me near the front." He laughed. I remember that laugh. I transferred $30,500 to their joint account in 2 installments over October and November. I have the bank records. I have the confirmation messages my son sent me after each transfer. I have everything. Because I am an engineer. An engineer's document. The event was scheduled for the 3rd weekend of June. In the first week of February, I called my son to ask about the guest list. I wanted to know whether my cousin from Thunder Bay should expect a formal invitation, because she had mentioned wanting to make travel arrangements early. My son didn't answer. He texted back an hour later. "Can we talk tomorrow, Dad? Busy day?" We did not talk the next day, or the day after that. I called again on the 4th day and he picked up, and I could hear immediately in his voice that something was wrong. He sounded the way he sounded as a teenager when he'd done something he needed to confess, that flat, careful, slightly too controlled tone. He said, "Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." I said, "All right." He said that his wife had been talking to her event planner, and that the planner had raised some concerns about the flow of the day. He said, and I could hear him reading from something, or perhaps repeating words he had been coached to repeat, that the aesthetic and tone of the event was very specific, and that they wanted to make sure every element aligned. He said that his wife felt he used the word felt 3 times in one sentence, that the guest list needed to reflect a certain cohesiveness. I waited. He said, "She thinks it might be better if you attended the rehearsal dinner on the Friday, and then gave us the Saturday celebration as," and he paused here, "as a more intimate family moment." I want to be accurate about what was said next, because it matters. I said, "Your wife is uninviting me from your wedding celebration." He said, "It's not, it's complicated, Dad." I said, "I paid $30,500 toward this event." He said, "I know, and we're so grateful, but she feels that—" I said, "I am not asking about her feelings. I am asking whether my son is telling me I am not welcome at an event I funded." There was a long silence. Then he said, "It's just the dynamic, Dad. She says things are always tense when you're both in the same room, and she wants the day to be perfect." And I said, "I understand." And I did understand. I understood completely, in that moment, with a clarity I had not felt in years. I understood that I had been paying for something I was never truly included in. I understood that my role in this family was financial, and my presence was conditional, and my son, who sat beside me at a lake in October and didn't need to say a single word, had allowed this to happen, had perhaps agreed to it, had perhaps made the call only because the alternative, not telling me, would have been worse for him logistically. I said, "I need a few days to think." He said, "Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need. We love you." I hung up. I did not sleep that night. I did not eat much the following day. I went for a very long walk along the lakeshore in the morning, the kind of February walk where the wind off Lake Ontario cuts right through everything, and that was exactly what I needed. Cold and clear and honest. I thought about my wife. I thought about what she would say. My wife was the gentlest person I have ever known, but she had a core of absolute steel, and I know with certainty she would have looked at me and said, "Arthur, you know what you have to do." On the 3rd day, I called my financial advisor. Then I called my lawyer. Then I called my bank. Then I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop, and I began to make a list. The condominium was the first item on the list. I had gifted the down payment without documentation. In the absence of a formal gift letter, which, my lawyer informed me, I had never signed because the transaction was never properly structured, there was a reasonable legal argument that the funds constituted a personal loan. My lawyer was careful to tell me that this was a complicated area and that outcomes vary. But he also said, "If you want to put formal pressure on this situation, there are mechanisms available to you." I was not interested in taking my son to court. I was not interested in cruelty. I was interested in consequences. There is a difference. I sent my son a registered letter drafted by my lawyer informing him that the $94,000 I had contributed toward the purchase of the condominium had been provided with an expectation of familial reciprocity, that had since been materially withdrawn, and that I was formally requesting repayment on a schedule to be negotiated, failing which I would pursue the matter through the appropriate channels. I also sent a separate letter to my son and his wife jointly, informing them that I was withdrawing my $30,500 contribution to their vow renewal celebration, effective immediately, and requesting the return of those funds within 30 days. My son called me 4 minutes after the letters were delivered. I did not answer. He called 11 more times that day. I did not answer. His wife called twice from a number I didn't recognize. I did not answer. He drove to my house that evening. I saw his car in the driveway from the kitchen window. I went to the door. He looked terrible. He looked like a man who had been told the floor was solid and had just fallen through it. He said, "Dad, please, can we just talk?" I said, "Come in." We sat at the same kitchen table where I had made my list. He talked for a long time. He said his wife hadn't meant it the way it sounded. He said she had anxiety about family dynamics. He said she loved me, which we both knew was not true, but which I did not challenge because it wasn't the point. He said he was sorry. He said it multiple times, and I want to be fair to him. I believe he was sorry. I believe he felt terrible. I believe he was sitting across from his father in the same kitchen where we had cooked together during the worst year of both our lives, and he understood finally the full weight of what he had permitted to happen. I said, "I believe you're sorry." He exhaled. I said, "But sorry doesn't answer my question. The question is whether you told your wife that what she was asking was unacceptable, not uncomfortable, not complicated, unacceptable. Did you tell her that?" He looked at the table. I said, "That's what I thought." I told him that I was not withdrawing my love. I told him I was not ending our relationship. I told him that what I was doing was establishing, for the first time and long overdue, the terms on which I was willing to continue. I said, "I will not be someone's funding source, and nobody. I will not be financially present and personally excluded. If I am family, I am family at the table. If I am not welcome at the table, I am not the man you call when you need $30,000. He said, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "I want you to go home and have a real conversation with your wife. Not a managed conversation, not a negotiation about optics. A real one. I want you to tell her what your father said, word for word, and I want you to tell her that you agree with him, and then I want you to call me." He left. That was a Tuesday. He did not call Wednesday. He did not call Thursday. On Friday morning, I received a text from his wife, the first direct communication she had ever sent me, which was 3 paragraphs long and contained the phrases, "My emotional safety, your controlling behavior, and we need space to process this as a couple." I read it twice. Then I set my phone down and called my lawyer. I instructed him to proceed. What followed over the next 6 weeks was not dramatic in the way that word usually implies. There were no screaming matches. There were no scenes. There were letters and responses to letters, and one formal mediation session at my lawyer's office in downtown Oakville that lasted 2.5 hours and ended without resolution because my daughter-in-law's position was that the $94,000 had been a gift, full stop, and gifts are not repaid. My lawyer had anticipated this. He had prepared accordingly. It turned out that over the years, I had sent my son money in various forms for the condo, yes, but also $8,000 toward a car, $4,200 to cover a tax debt he'd gotten into in 2020, $3,500 for a Europe trip they took for their 3rd anniversary. All of it transferred electronically. All of it documented in my bank records with accompanying text messages in which my son used the word loan no fewer than 7 times across various conversations. "Dad, I hate asking for another loan. I'll pay back the loan when I get my bonus, I promise. You're the only one I'd ever ask for a loan like this." The word loan, used by my son, in writing, 7 times. My daughter-in-law's lawyer became considerably quieter after those records were provided. The mediation ended with an agreement. My son would repay $62,000 over 4 years at a structured schedule. The vow renewal funds $30,000. $500 had already been returned within the 30-day window, transferred back to my account on day 28, which told me the financial pressure had been felt immediately. The event itself was postponed indefinitely, which was not something I had any involvement in and not something I felt responsible for. I want to stop here and tell you something honestly, because I think it matters. I did not enjoy this process. I am a 63-year-old man, who lost his wife 11 years ago and who has for 11 years organized a significant portion of his life around staying connected to his son. This was not a victory in any way that felt good. There were nights during those 6 weeks when I sat in my living room in the dark for a long time, not thinking about anything, just sitting with the weight of it. But I also knew with the same certainty I have when I look at a load calculation and the numbers simply do not lie that what I had been doing for years was not generosity. It was subsidization of my own exclusion. And a man who funds his own irrelevance eventually has to decide whether he is going to keep doing that or whether he is going to stop. I stopped. My son and I are speaking again. It is not the same as it was, but it is more honest than it has been in years, which is worth something. He calls me on Sunday evenings now, and we talk for a while, and he asks how I'm doing in a way that suggests he actually wants to know. His wife and I have not spoken since the mediation. That may change. It may not. I have made my peace with both outcomes. Last month, I drove up to Algonquin. First time since that trip with my son back in 2014. I parked at the same spot on the east side of the park, walked down to the same lake, sat on the same rock. The ice was just starting to break at the edges. Geese coming in from the south. The kind of afternoon that reminds you the world is entirely indifferent to your personal grievances, and somehow that is the most comforting thing imaginable. I sat there for a long time. I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not negotiate my own worth to people who had forgotten it. I am an engineer. I know what a foundation is supposed to hold. And I know better than most that the only structures worth building are the ones where every part carries its load. If you are sitting somewhere right now watching this, and something in this story sounds familiar, if you know what it feels like to be the person everyone calls and no one thinks to invite, I want you to hear this. Your presence is not a consolation prize. Your love is not a line of credit, and it is never too late to stop building on a foundation that was never designed to include you. That is all I have to say. If this story reached you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have been through something like this yourself, I would genuinely like to read your story in the comments. You are not alone in this, not even close.